Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me. I have had an issue with Jordan Peterson for quite some time, mainly because I think that as a psychologist, he leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not suggesting for a moment that he doesn't have any valuable things to say. In fact, in an interview that I'm about to play with you, a part of which I'm not going to play actually, which is with Piers Morgan and Jordan Peterson. But in this particular interview, he's asked about Donald Trump, and he makes statements that I think besmirch the role he has as a elitist psychologist. And I think that we should really take a lot of what Peterson says as being a far-right propagandist encased in or clothed in what appears to be a psychological or a psychologist's suit. So he fits this role as a psychologist. He's written a few books which have been bestsellers. Not going to dispute any of that. I'm not even going to dispute the fact that on time there are occasions where he says appropriate things. But there have been indications over the years that to some degree he's a misogynist, and that in this particular interview you can see that he's an extreme right-wing leaning individual. And you'll see in part as we go through this interview on the United States elections that he fails to do one thing that all psychologists and many psychiatrists have already done, but which he fails to do in relation to Donald Trump. Now, what this tells me is that he is not the expert that he professes to be, that he has extreme right-wing leanings, which I think we on the left or others in general need to be mindful of, because these views coming from someone like he who gets lots and lots of coverage need to be considered when analysing whether this man is somebody whom we should take note of, be wary of, and particularly, I guess, question some of his perspectives on societal issues in particular. So I'll just play part of this video and we'll talk about it as we go through it.
Your own soul to occupy yourself with for the rest of your life. And this is something, we're either going to learn this voluntarily, consciously, and wisely, or we're going to be beat to death by our own stupidity. And that's going to happen quickly in many, many ways. You can see it unfolding. Well, you can see it unfolding around us now.
What I think happens here to some extent is that when he's talking about being beaten to death by your own stupidity, it's kind of like projection, because what he talks about later indicates his own stupidity, and how people, I guess, like myself, who view these things quite critically, will argue, well, what you're doing is inappropriate. You failed as a psychologist and as someone who should understand behaviour, and particularly behaviour which may be damaging to others or to society in general. So let's hear what else he has to say.
So 2 questions on the US election. Can Donald Trump win? And would it be a good thing for America and the world if he does win?
Well, I think he can win, assuming that he'll be put on the ballot, as far as I've been able to tell. And God only knows how reliable the polls are, and generally not very, because the questions are usually biased unconscionably. He's certainly popular enough to win. I don't see another candidate emerging on the Republican side at the moment who poses a threat. There are some interesting people running, that's for sure. It looks to me like DeSantis is a pretty competent character, and Vivek Ramaswamy is, at minimum, very interesting and bright and quite the disruptive force. On the Democrat side, Dean Phillips, who almost no one knows about, and who the Democrats are doing, what would you say, everything they can to keep it that way. He's an interesting alternative to Biden. I don't think Kennedy has a chance, although there are some things about him I like. I think Trump could win.
So just on those 2 things, Ramaswamy, that is an interesting comment to make, because he is a disruptor. He's an idiot, but he is intelligent. There's no doubt about that. He presents himself in an argumentative way, which is challenging. I understand all of that as well, so tick him on those categories. With regard to this other candidate that he talks about, I have never heard of him. Perhaps I don't follow American politics as closely as I should. With regard to Biden, well, let's just see how that unfolds. So he wasn't overly critical of Biden, I don't think, but he certainly has some interesting perspectives on Trump.
Will that be good? It depends on what he does if he wins. It depends on the manner in which the victory takes place. It depends on whether or not the people on the more conservative side of the spectrum are able to extend a welcoming hand to those who are more on the progressive side. And it certainly depends on whether those on the progressive side are willing to dispense with some of the ideological stupidity that possesses them, that is generating an endless sequence of unnecessary culture war. No, the left in particular has become 100% preoccupied with the most pathological possible political narrative, which is essentially a victim-victimizer story that you can understand.
Now this is the issue that I wanted to talk about. So here he goes onto a rant. I'll play some of the rest for you. But here he is having a rant about victimhood. Now, this is Peterson's thing. But let's keep in mind that someone like Peterson should have quite a psychological understanding, should have a background in what victimhood looks like and who perpetrates it. And in this particular case, I think, and you just watch this, tell me what you think, but I believe he actually misses the point completely. And this is bizarre, given that the issues around victimhood and Trump in particular and his acceptance of and portrayal of victimhood is quite profound. But somehow Peterson misses all of that. So this is Peterson's incredible blind spot. Now, we all have them. I have them. And and people in my comment section often tell me what they are, thank God. And I'm happy to take on board any of those criticisms. But for someone like Peterson to talk in the way that he does about Trump and not identify these blind spots, I find is somewhat disturbing.
Element of social interaction among humans, from marriage upwards to the political, in terms of who's got the power, who's the oppressed. And there's nothing in that but an endless recipe for not only for the most bitter of soul-devouring resentments, but for the application of any form of vengeance imaginable. I can't imagine, this is something that possesses the universities as well, there's nothing more toxic than a victim-victimized narrative. And that certainly possesses...
And this is what interests me. And it's not wrong, right? So this concept that victimhood and victimizing a society in the way that has happened in the United States is extremely troubling. I understand that, and what he's saying is true. But he's not talking about it in terms of what Trump is doing. He's talking about it in what he believes is what the left are doing, what the woke people are doing. This is his thing. This is about the impact that all of this stuff has on culture, and particularly restricting the way, or attacking, I guess, the way the right think about most things, and as a result, the cancelled culture, which tends to evolve from all of that.
Radical left in particular to the nth degree. And there's nothing in that but disaster. So, you know, it's part and parcel of what we've been discussing. There's going to be very rapid change, not least on the electoral front in the upcoming year. And how that goes will depend on how people conduct themselves, and ever more so. So we can pray that we're terrified enough of the potential negative consequences and enticed enough by the potential positive consequences to walk ever more carefully. We'll see. You know, if you have big toys, you better be a big boy. And we don't have big toys, we have giant toys. And they will stomp us into the ground unless we're wise enough to guide them properly?
You know, the fascinating thing
I have very little idea what big toys he's talking about, but I'm quite convinced, though, that his analysis in that instance was actually about the way he viewed the left of politics, not the right.
Trump, for example, is I always say to people, I've known him a long time and know him very well. He's got the thinnest skin of any person in public life. He reacts to absolutely everything and goes to DEFCON 1 in a heartbeat. But he also has the thickest skin. He can soak up stuff that would crush any other political figure in history in seconds. This is a guy facing nearly 100 criminal charges, and yet all that's done is actually make him more popular. I mean, we are into completely uncharted territory with Trump as a political figure, aren't we?
Now, what I find fascinating about the following conversation, which you should watch, is that the reality is that they're talking about a narcissistic personality. In fact, they're talking about a psychopath. Now, psychopaths do what Piers Morgan just talked about. They are insensitive to the needs of others. They're sensitive to the emotions that others might have, and they're certainly insensitive to the impact they have on others. So this is a psychopath. This is a narcissistic, psychopathic individual we're talking about. And even though they've identified those as kind of issues, they don't relate them. They fail, in fact, to relate them to Trump. I find that most interesting.
Well, I don't think the Democrats could have done a better job of keeping the name of Trump alive if they would have planned to do that. And it's certainly possible that in some ways they did plan to do that, because the scuttlebutt among the political theorists that pass for wise men among the Democrats is that, well, if Trump is the candidate, then Biden can beat him. It's like, well, not necessarily. I wouldn't bet the farm on that.
Incidentally, that idea about scuttlebutts for wise men who declare themselves to be Democrats is also projection, because this is scuttlebutt by a wise man who pretends to be a psychologist.
That's probably already occurred. And, you know, Trump is canny enough to know that in some real way, all publicity is good publicity, and it's certainly the case that the Democrat persecution of Trump, and I think that's the right term, has kept him alive and has also cast him so perversely in the role of victim that the Democrats themselves are always, what would you say, trumpeting as being...
Now, this is where I have to jump in, because there is no doubt that Trump has cast himself as the victim. He does it over and over again. You don't have to be a psychologist or a social worker like myself or someone who works in human services to see what Trump is doing. He does it all the time because this man has so little in his soul that he's trying to dig deep, trying to fill that void with love and affection and whatever. And the only way he knows how to do that is to victimize others, to make them appear to be those that are responsible for that hole that he feels within himself. So this is what fascinates me also about this discussion, is that why can't a psychologist, an eminent psychologist who professes to be the wise man in this room, why can't he understand exactly what Trump is doing and how Trump manipulates the media, including all of these cases that are before all these courts, and how he uses them as an opportunity to fundraise for himself, knowing that through arguing stuff in court and him appearing to be the victim means that at the end of the day, people are going to want to support him because they feel sorry for the poor old bastard.
With. It's an unbelievably demented move on the strategic side. You know, my sense was if Biden would have taken a careful look at the Abraham Accords, which he certainly should have, because then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now in relationship to Israel, let's say. He could have given Trump a medal, clapped him on the back, said, "Good job, mate," and maybe he would have ridden off into the sunset. Now, that would have meant
Now,
that
this displays the most ignorant statement one could ever make about Trump. Can anybody out there imagine how Trump would have responded if he had received a medal, got a pat on the back, and told to piss off? Trump would have accepted the medal, thank you very much, I'm a great human being, and he would never have pissed off. He would have attacked the person that gave him the medal. So this is the most stupidest, bizarre statement I have heard anybody ever make, and it came from Jordan Peterson. So the question is, what does this tell us about Peterson? Well, frankly, he's a moron.
would have had to contend with someone like DeSantis, let's say, who's at minimum hyper-competent, and I don't think that was in the cards. So instead, they determined to play idiot political games, not like those aren't well known on the Republican side, and they raised Trump from the dead, and they do that continually. So, well, I think personally, and this is just a guess because what do I know, I think that the most likely outcome is that Trump is the next president. That's what it looks like to me. So I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that
because
could
he's
absolutely
he's so
happen.
divisive. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because when I did the Celebrity Apprentice, the first series of that back in 2008, I saw
love
Trump
this
across.
bit. You need to watch this because this is Piers Morgan telling us, trying to give this other version of who Trump is. And little does Piers understand that there is the only reason why he would have contacted Piers Morgan once he left CNN was because there was something that Trump believed he could have got out of that relationship. It is the only reason he would have done it, not because he's a friend of yours, Piers.
Boardroom table for 3 hours a night for about 6 weeks. And you get to know somebody pretty well, actually, because a lot of it didn't get aired. If he showed even an ounce of the empathy that he showed to people then, if he showed more of the humor without being vicious, if he showed less of the punching everyone in the face and more of occasionally putting a metaphorical arm around people, I think the perception of Trump would change dramatically. But he seems to think the only way to be a political leader is to be a kind of swaggering, trash-talking, very aggressive person. And I think that's a shame. It's a shame for him. And it's a shame for those like me who see a lot of good in Trump. He's been, he was very good to me. When I left America, left CNN and went back to Britain, I can count on one hand the number of American people in the business, if you like, who stayed in touch with me. Trump did. He rang me quite regularly to check how I was doing. Could he help? He didn't need to do that. So he has got these qualities. It's just I don't see much evidence of it, of him as a political leader. He's taken a different path.
Well, I would say part of that is a consequence of the fact that the radical leftists have given it compassion and empathy a bad name.
So the reason why this man that Trump is a terrible human being is because, now when you think about victim blaming, just think about what Jordan Peterson's doing. Because for him, it's about what he believes the radical left are doing.
And so because Trump is standing against, especially the radicals, he's being put in a position where he more or less de facto has to stand against that kind of smothering, quasi-maternal, devouring sympathy that's part and parcel of being allied with the victims. And so part of that's an ideological problem. I would also say that I believe that there has been no political figure, certainly in my living memory, with the possible exception of Richard Nixon, who's been vilified more thoroughly and also more falsely than Trump. And I would point to the idiot conclusion of Russian collusion, especially with regards to the Hunter Biden laptop, as evidence in that regard. Trump has no shortage of flaws, let's say, a statement that can be said of all of us. But apart from vicious criticism with regard to those faults, there's been an absolute surfeit of devastating criticism and persecution for faults that are not real. And, you know, it isn't obvious to me how much...
All right, I have to stop it there because that's just absolute bullshit. The criticisms of Trump are more than appropriately justified. To say that you can't justify a man who has sexually abused a woman, found to be so in court, that caused a insurrection, who has behaved so badly that he's taken to court in relation to his properties and what he says he's supposed to be worth and a whole lot of the other shit that's going on, and 91 indictments. Like, what does all of that tell us about this man? Of course, you could be Jordan Peterson and blame the deep state for that too, I guess, and suggest that the justice system does not work in the favour of people like Donald Trump. No, it doesn't, because they're bloody criminals. That's why, and that's why the system is there in the first place, to ensure that everybody abides by the law and that no one is separate from the law simply because of the power and authority that they hold. So let me know what you think about all of this, because I think this is a really important issue for us to take up. If someone like Jordan Peterson, who has this very large megaphone, writes heaps and heaps of books, gets more and more publicity than probably anybody else on this planet, talks such shit and crap that, you know, it makes you wonder at the end of the day whether there's anything this man says that you can actually believe. And I would take everything that he says with a grain of salt, because I, for one, don't trust him. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.